What would you do if your future son-in-law called you a failure at your own daughter's wedding? That's not just a question, it's the beginning of one of the most unforgettable family betrayal stories you will ever hear. A story where arrogance meets silence, where appearances deceive, and where a single moment transforms a celebration into a revenge story that millions dream of, but few ever witness. The ballroom at the Lakeshore Country Club gleamed that afternoon, crystal chandeliers raining light across rows of white-draped tables. Guests whispered in excitement, champagne glasses clinking softly as the string quartet tuned their instruments. Emily Blake, my daughter, was radiant in her gown, unaware that her groom's arrogance was about to plant the seeds of his own downfall. And me, I was just the father of the bride, sitting quietly dressed modestly, playing the role everyone believed an old man retired between opportunities. Jason Miller, the groom. My daughter's chosen partner, strutted through the crowd with the polished confidence of a man who thought he owned the room. He laughed too loudly, adjusted his tie too often, and made sure everyone heard about his six-figure salary and 40% growth in his department at Technova Innovations. To the crowd, he looked like the rising star of a powerful company. To me, he looked like a man who had forgotten the most basic rule of life: never underestimate the quiet ones. I still remember his voice sharp and smug as he introduced me to one of his colleagues near the reception line. This is Arthur Blake, Emily's father. He lives quietly in Evanston. Retired. Nothing fancy. He said it with a smile that wasn't a smile at all, a dismissal wrapped in politeness. The words landed heavier than he imagined, and the people around us shifted uncomfortably. But Jason didn't notice. He thought he was winning. He thought lowering me made him rise higher. But here's the truth. He didn't know truth that would turn his wedding day into a global wedding twist story. I was no ordinary retiree. I was no man between opportunities. I was the hidden half of Technova, the co-founder, the silent hidden millionaire who had built the very empire Jason bragged about. And on this day, with my cufflinks gleaming under the ballroom lights, he was about to find out. This isn't just a wedding. This is a lesson about respect, about arrogance, about what happens when you judge someone by their plate of soup instead of the empire they built. And as you listen, remember this: in every room, in every family, there is always someone underestimated. And when the truth comes out, the price of assumptions can be devastating. I still remember every detail of that dinner at Lakeview Grill, the way the candlelight bounced off the polished silverware, the faint murmur of other guests enjoying their evening, and the tension that clung to our table like an invisible fog. It was supposed to be a celebration, a warm family gathering to mark my daughter's engagement, a moment where we could enjoy a meal and share a toast. But what unfolded instead was the beginning of a deep wound, a family betrayal so sharp that it still echoes in my memory. Jason Miller sat across from me, his posture stiff, but his expression smug, as if the entire restaurant existed to witness his success. He didn't wait for the waiter to even pour the water before he leaned forward, adjusted his tie, and said in that carefully measured voice, "So Arthur, Emily tells me you're between opportunities right now." The words hung in the air, sticky and suffocating, like cheap cologne sprayed too heavily. Between opportunities. That was his way of calling me unemployed, without saying the word, of painting me as irrelevant, as a man who no longer mattered. I simply unfolded my napkin and said quietly, "I'm retired." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind of smile that carried more condescension than warmth. "Right, of course," he said, nodding as if he were humoring a child. That was the first knife he twisted, and I felt it sink deeper with every word he spoke. He launched into his favorite subject himself. Jason talked about Technova Innovations, the company he worked for, describing it as if he personally had built it, brick by brick. "I'm senior manager of corporate sales. Been there 3 years. Increased my department sales by 40%. His voice was loud enough for the neighboring table to overhear. He sat back, clearly expecting admiration, perhaps even envy. I kept my tone neutral, asked a simple question about how long he had been there, and let him dig his own grave with every boastful sentence. My daughter Emily, bless her heart, tried to smooth things over, gently touching his arm and saying Dad's being modest. He always downplays himself. But Jason didn't notice. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking past us at some imagined audience where he was the hero of a revenge story, against age, against tradition, against anyone who threatened his fragile sense of superiority. When the waiter came to take our orders, Jason chose the pan-seared salmon with truffle risotto. Emily ordered herb-crusted chicken, and I asked for the soup and sandwich combo. Jason's eyebrows flicked upward, and his voice dripped with false understanding as he said, "Everyone has different budgets." I totally get it. That single word budgets landed like a slap. In his mind, I was not just retired. I was poor, insignificant, a man unworthy of respect. Emily flushed red, whispering, "Dad just likes simple food." But Jason wasn't listening. He had already decided who I was. And that was the real betrayal, not just the words, but the assumptions behind them, the way he believed he could measure my worth by the meal I ordered. He carried on bragging about working 60-hour weeks, about staying current with industry trends, about how the business world now required aggressive strategies and fresh perspectives. His fork moved like a conductor's baton as he gestured toward me. People your age, no offense, get stuck in old patterns. The world's different now. Survival of the fittest. He called older employees dead weight, and I filed that phrase carefully in the back of my mind. Dead weight. That's what he thought of me, of the men and women who had built the foundation he stood on. I kept my expression calm, but inside me a storm was building. Every insult, every smug comment, every casual dismissal was a betrayal of the respect I deserved, not because of my wealth, not because of my accomplishments, but because I was the father of the bride who loved his daughter deeply and had given her the best life I could. Jason didn't see that. He only saw an old man with soup and a modest jacket, a man he could talk down to without consequence. By the time the check arrived, Jason was glowing with the satisfaction of what he believed was victory. He thought he had put me in my place, but what he didn't realize was that the real game had only just begun. He thought he was climbing higher, but all he was doing was walking further out on a ledge I had built long before he was born. And as I watched him laugh, as I saw Emily's nervous smile falter, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just dinner. This was betrayal. And betrayal always has a price. When Jason Miller pulled his sleek BMW into my modest driveway in Evanston, the contrast could not have been sharper. And I knew before he even stepped out of the car that this visit would be nothing more than a performance, a carefully staged moment of what I can only call pretend affection, the kind of shallow gestures people make when they want to look like they care, but can't hide the disdain in their eyes. Emily jumped out first, her face glowing with excitement, a cream-colored envelope clutched in her hand, and I could tell from the way she nearly skipped up the steps that she was eager to show me the official wedding invitation, a daughter sharing joy with her father, innocent and pure. Jason followed more slowly, his hand smoothing the lapel of his expensive suit jacket, his eyes scanning the siding of my house, the old oak tree in the front yard, the furniture glimpsed through the windows. And in that brief inspection, I saw everything I needed to know. He didn't see a home. He saw evidence of mediocrity, a place that didn't measure up to the standards he believed defined worth. "Mr. Blake," he said when I opened the door, his handshake firm, but deliberately brief, his tone polite, yet lacking warmth. "Hope we're not interrupting your afternoon activities." Afternoon activities, he might as well have said naps or television reruns, as though the rhythm of my retirement could be reduced to idleness. I smiled, let them in, and said cheerfully, "Not at all what brings you both here." Emily practically burst with excitement, holding out the invitation. "Dad, you're the first person to see it." I opened it slowly, studied the elegant calligraphy, the heavy cardstock embossed with gold, and said, "Beautiful, sweetheart. June 15th, Lakeshore Country Club. Very elegant." She beamed, pointing at Jason. He chose the venue. Jason puffed slightly, his chest rising with pride. "It's where all the important Technova events are held. Location matters for occasions like this." His words were rehearsed, delivered with the calculated air of a man making sure his boss and board members would be impressed not only by his wedding, but by his choice of setting. I nodded, murmured, "Sounds impressive. I should start thinking about what to wear." That was his cue. He leaned forward, adopting what he probably thought was a tactful tone. "Actually, Mr. Blake, that's something I wanted to discuss. My boss, Richard Hale, will be attending. Very influential man. Perhaps you should dress more presentably than usual." Emily shot him a warning look, but Jason was committed to his mission of improvement, his voice dripping with concern that was anything but genuine. I kept my face neutral, said mildly, "I have a perfectly good suit." He glanced at my slacks, my cardigan, my comfortable shoes, and replied with forced reassurance, "I'm sure you do. But Richard, expects a certain level of sophistication from the families of his employees. First impressions matter enormously in business. His slip between names was telling. He wasn't thinking of me as family. He was thinking of me as a potential liability in his professional climb. Built from nothing, I thought, silently remembering the years Richard and I had worked side by side in that cramped garage, eating cold pizza, falling asleep at our desks, and now my so-called son-in-law was lecturing me on how to impress him. I smiled faintly, said, "Don't worry, son, I know how to handle bosses." He doubted every word. His eyes betrayed it. Emily, desperate to ease the tension, suggested we move into the garden, insisting she wanted to show Jason my tomato plants. We stepped outside, sunlight spilling across neat rows of vegetables, the air carrying the earthy smell of soil and growth, and for a moment it felt almost peaceful. But Emily's voice carried weight when she turned to me. "Dad, what are you planning?" She had seen through my disguise, sensed the sharpness behind my calm. I gestured to the bench I had built last summer, sat down and invited her to join me. Planning, just trying to be a good host to my future son-in-law. She didn't buy it. "Don't," she said firmly. "I've known you my entire life. You're up to something, and it involves Jason. Why are you letting him think you're just some retired old man?" Through the glass door, I could see Jason pacing near the dining table, studying the seating chart Emily had left there. His phone pressed to his ear as he gestured animatedly, probably updating someone about Richard's presence at the wedding. The irony was too perfect. I turned back to Emily and said softly, "Sweetheart, sometimes people need time to show their true nature." She frowned, pressed harder. "Why won't you tell him the truth about Technova?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've always known, Dad. Maybe not the details, but I knew you didn't just work there. Those photographs in your study, the awards you thought I didn't notice. The way Richard talks about you when he calls. Why are you lying to the man I'm going to marry?" I squeezed her hand, saw the ring glinting in the sun, scattering tiny rainbows across the garden dirt. "I'm not lying. I'm just not volunteering information. Has Jason ever asked about my background, about who I really am as a person?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. Jason had never asked. He assumed, he judged, and he dismissed. "This isn't fair," she said finally, her voice breaking. "He doesn't know he's being tested." I met her eyes, steady, unwavering. "Life isn't fair, sweetheart. People judge each other every day based on surface impressions. The question is, what kind of man does Jason become when he thinks he has the upper hand?" Emily looked through the glass door at him, pacing like a general preparing for war, and whispered, "He's not always like this. When we're alone, he's kinder." I nodded, but my voice carried weight. "Character isn't what we do when it's easy. It's what we do when we think nobody important is watching." She went quiet, torn between loyalty and doubt. Jason appeared at the sliding door, tapping his watch, his expression impatient. "Emily, we should head out soon. I've got a call with the West Coast team in an hour." She lingered, looked at me one more time, and said quietly, "Just be gentle with him, Dad. Whatever you're planning." I kissed her forehead, smiled, and whispered the truth. Only I knew. Gentle lessons are rarely the ones that stick. That night, after Jason and Emily left my house, the silence felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves had absorbed every insult, every condescending glance, every careless word Jason had thrown in my direction. I walked slowly into my study, closed the door behind me, and let the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. The photographs on the wall seemed to glow in the dim lamplight, silent witnesses to a life Jason believed had no value. There was the framed newspaper clipping of our first major product launch, my name printed in bold alongside Richard Hale's. The incorporation papers from 1995, still bearing my signature in ink now faded. The glossy magazine cover from 2018, where Forbes had called me the quiet revolutionary of AI innovation. Jason didn't know any of it. He had never asked. He had chosen to see me as nothing but an old man eating soup, and the betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just his blindness, it was his arrogance. He looked at me and saw irrelevance when what he should have seen was the foundation beneath his entire career. I sat in my leather chair and let my mind drift back to those early years, the years of hunger, sacrifice, and relentless ambition that Jason would never understand. I could almost smell the grease-stained pizza boxes, hear the hum of outdated servers, crammed into the corner of that garage where Richard and I spent 18-hour days coding until our fingers cramped, surviving on caffeine and hope. We were nobodies then, just two dreamers, drowning in debt, willing to risk everything, because we believed in something the world thought was impossible. We built algorithms by hand-soldered wires ourselves, patched leaks in the roof between product demos. My marriage suffered, my daughter grew up with me often absent, and there were nights I came home too late to kiss Emily goodnight. Those were sacrifices Jason couldn't even imagine, because to him, success wasn't about pain or resilience. It was about flaunting numbers at dinner tables and buying cufflinks that matched the boardroom dress code. I thought about Emily, her laugh as a child, echoing through this same house, her drawings pinned to my office wall beside technical schematics. She had been my anchor through every storm, even when she didn't realize it, even when my obsession with Technova kept me away from her school plays and soccer games. The guilt of those lost years pressed down on me now more than ever. Because if all that sacrifice led her into the arms of a man like Jason Miller, then what had it all been for? The idea that my daughter could tie her life to someone so shallow, so dismissive, so blind to true worth, it terrified me in ways business losses never had. I leaned forward, elbows on my desk, staring at the photograph of Richard and me in that cluttered garage, both of us looking impossibly young, eyes blazing with the belief we could change the world. We had. Technova had grown into a $200 million enterprise, a name synonymous with innovation across 4 states employing over 800 people. And yet here I was treated as dead weight by a 34-year-old manager who had no clue whose shoulders he was standing on. It wasn't just insulting, it was dangerous. Because arrogance like Jason's doesn't just poison a dinner table, it poisons marriages, families, entire futures. If he could belittle me so easily, what would stop him from belittling Emily? Once the vows were spoken and the applause of the wedding day faded, I imagined her sitting across from him, years from now, listening to that same smug tone turned against her, and my chest tightened. I had fought too hard, given too much to watch my daughter become collateral damage in a man's endless quest to prove himself superior. That was the real betrayal, not Jason's words against me, but the possibility that Emily would one day wake up beside a stranger who saw her as less, who measured her worth by what she could do for his image. The lamplight flickered, casting long shadows across the shelves of awards and patents, reminders of victories I no longer flaunted. I had chosen silence, chosen to let the world think I was merely retired, because I believed stepping back would give Emily space to build her own path. But Jason mistook my silence for weakness. He mistook my modest life for failure. And in doing so, he revealed more about himself than he ever realized. My anger simmered, not because I needed his respect, but because I feared for my daughter's future. A man who can't respect the father will never respect the daughter. I closed my eyes and took a long breath, steadying myself. This wasn't just about pride or ego or revenge for being called irrelevant. This was about Emily. Every memory, every scar, every sacrifice I had made over 3 decades was for her, and now it was time to ensure those sacrifices meant something. Jason Miller had no idea who I was, but soon he would. And when he learned, it wouldn't just be a revelation, it would be a reckoning. From the moment I closed my study door that night, the plan began to take shape, not out of anger, but out of cold purpose, the kind of purpose forged only by years of building something from nothing, by learning that patience often cuts deeper than rage. Jason Miller thought he had measured me, thought he had filed me neatly under retired, irrelevant, harmless. But what he did not realize was that I had spent 3 decades in the art of long games. Building a company like Technova wasn't about quick wins. It was about laying brick upon brick until a foundation was unshakable, and now I would apply the same discipline to him. This wasn't just going to be payback. This was going to be education. The first step was appearance. On Michigan Avenue, I stood in front of the mirror at Armando's Tailoring, letting the 3-way glass reflect back a version of myself Jason had never seen. The charcoal gray suit draped perfectly subtle pinstripes, catching the light just enough to whisper authority, without screaming for attention. Armando adjusted the shoulders and smiled. This suit says dignity without shouting about money. That was exactly what I wanted, elegance that spoke in whispers, not shouts. Jason judged by labels, by flash, by cost. I wanted a suit that carried quiet weight, a reminder that real power doesn't need to announce itself. From there, I walked into Cartwright & Associates jewelry store, where a saleswoman laid velvet trays across the counter. My eyes went straight to the platinum cufflinks embedded with Technova's diamond-shaped insignia. Years ago, Richard Hale had suggested them as gifts for our executives, and I knew the moment he saw them on my wrists under the wedding chandeliers, he would recognize me instantly. Jason could brag all he wanted about six-figure salaries and 40% growth, but when the co-founder of the company appeared beside him at his own wedding reception, the truth would gleam louder than any boast. These cufflinks weren't accessories. They were weapons. Then came the gift. At First National, my private banker, Jonathan Pierce, raised his eyebrows as I signed the authorization. $50,000 certified check, neatly prepared in an envelope that would slide easily across a reception table. Generous even by your standards, Jonathan remarked. I only nodded. This wasn't generosity, it was stagecraft. Jason had spent months looking down on me, assuming my soup orders and simple cardigans meant a lack of means. When that check surfaced, when its amount dwarfed his annual salary, the facade would collapse with the weight of undeniable reality. But planning wasn't only about appearances, it was also about information. Richard called one evening, his voice warm as always, asking when I would finally return from this retirement experiment. He mentioned Jason in passing, the ambitious young sales manager, with ideas about restructuring, about cutting dead weight from the senior staff. I listened quietly, my anger tempered by the satisfaction of hearing Jason's exact words echoed from Richard's boardroom conversations. He was already sharpening knives, already preparing to sacrifice loyalty for ambition. Richard sounded uncertain, admiring the drive, but wary of the arrogance, and I made a note of it. Jason was consistent, and consistency made him predictable. The more predictable a man is, the easier it is to dismantle him. Through all of this, Emily watched me carefully, her eyes filled with questions she didn't dare ask in front of Jason. Late one evening in the garden, she confronted me again, her voice a blend of love and accusation. Dad, why are you doing this? Why not just tell him the truth? I met her gaze and told her gently. Because truth given too soon is wasted. He has to reveal himself. And you, sweetheart, you need to see him clearly. She frowned, conflicted, torn between protecting Jason and trusting me. I squeezed her hand. I don't want to destroy your happiness. I want to protect it. So watch him. Watch how he treats waiters, colleagues, people who can't help him. That's who he really is. She hesitated, then nodded slowly, realizing that what I asked wasn't for me but for her. So we struck a silent pact. I would play the role Jason expected, the harmless retiree, the quiet father of the bride, the man content to sit in the background. Emily would play her role too, the loving fiancé who listened, smiled, and observed, collecting proof in silence. Together we would let Jason write his own confession, not with words on paper but with actions in real life. And when the wedding day arrived, when the chandeliers blazed and Richard Hale shook my hand, the truth would be undeniable. Jason would see that the father of the bride was no ordinary man, that the so-called retiree was in fact the hidden millionaire who had built the very company he claimed as his own platform. I closed my study that night with the plan etched into my mind like blueprints: the suit, the cufflinks, the gift, the information, the pact with Emily. Each detail was precise, each step designed to cut not with rage, but with revelation. Jason believed he was climbing, but he didn't realize the ground beneath him was already dissolving. And I, the man he dismissed as irrelevant, was the one pulling the strings. This wasn't just a plan for revenge, it was a lesson, and lessons like this last forever. The chandeliers in the Lakeshore Country Club ballroom burned brighter than the sun that afternoon, their crystal facets scattering light across champagne glasses and polished silver. And I remember thinking how perfect it all was, the stage set for a revelation Jason Miller could never have anticipated. The ceremony had ended without incident, Emily radiant in her grandmother's gown, Jason glowing with the triumph of vows, spoken before his colleagues and his boss. To him, the game was already won. He had managed to carry the image of a successful young executive marrying the daughter of a harmless retiree, a family betrayal hidden in plain sight. I stood near the bar as the reception unfolded, playing my part, smiling quietly, sipping water, while Jason worked the room like a politician. He shook hands, slapped shoulders, and told stories that cast him in a heroic light, all the while glancing toward Richard Hale, ensuring that his mentor saw every performance. When Richard moved toward the reception line to greet the family, Jason straightened his tie and grabbed Emily's hand, pride swelling in his chest. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He was about to display his social superiority, to demonstrate to his boss that he had married not only well, but strategically. He gestured toward me with a dismissive laugh and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "And this is my father-in-law, Arthur Blake. He's retired lives modestly in Evanston. Nothing fancy." The words hung in the air like perfume designed to impress, but instead suffocated everyone within reach. I could see colleagues exchanging glances, hear the faintest murmur ripple through the crowd. Jason thought he was cementing his narrative. He had no idea he was about to bury himself. Richard's head turned toward me, his eyes dropping to the platinum cufflinks that caught the chandelier light like beacons. In that split second, recognition slammed into him, and his voice rose above the reception noise with unguarded shock. "Arthur! Arthur Blake!" Jason blinked, confused, his grip on Emily's hand tightening as Richard stepped closer. "My God, Arthur, what in blazes are you doing here?" Jason's head snapped between us, suspicion and panic flashing in his eyes. "Mr. Hale, there must be some mistake. This is just Emily's father. He's retired unemployed." Richard turned on him with disbelief, sharp enough to cut glass. "Unemployed Jason, this man is Arthur Blake, co-founder of Technova Innovations, my business partner for 30 years. The words struck the room like thunder. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, champagne flutes froze halfway to lips, and every eye turned toward us. Jason's confident grin collapsed, his face draining of color, as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. "Partner," he croaked, his voice cracking in disbelief. Richard's tone hardened. "Yes, partner. The man who built half our core technologies, the man who created the foundation you now brag about. Without him, there would be no Technova." I extended my hand calmly, my voice. "Even good to see you, Richard. You look well." The gesture of composure only deepened Jason's humiliation. Around us, guests leaned in their curiosity, transforming into fascination. They were witnessing a wedding twist none of them would ever forget. Jason stammered, "That's impossible. He never told me." His eyes darted frantically from Richard to me to the gathering circle of colleagues who had once admired his confidence. The silence of their judgment was louder than any accusation. Richard's voice carried the authority of 1,000 boardroom negotiations. "The only mistake here is how my senior sales manager has spent months treating my business partner like a charity case." Jason's knees seemed to buckle. He tried to protest, tried to summon that smooth salesman's charm, but the words tangled in his throat. "I didn't know. He never said. I was only trying to help." The desperation in his tone stripped away every layer of arrogance he had worn. He was no longer the polished executive. He was a man exposed naked before the truth. Emily stood frozen beside him, torn between horror and pity, her eyes wide with tears that threatened to spill. I felt her pain, but I also knew this moment was necessary. Jason had written this ending himself with every condescending word, every assumption, every betrayal of respect. Now the bill had come due. Colleagues whispered, some openly shaking their heads. The hotel staff lingered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch history unfold. The weight of revelation pressed down on Jason until he finally dropped his gaze, his voice a whisper lost in the ballroom air. "Please, I can explain." But there was no explanation left. He had judged, he had assumed, and he had failed. I looked at him, my expression calm, and said quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Respect isn't measured in dollars or job titles, Jason. It's revealed in choices." His face crumpled as the reality set in. The father of the bride he had dismissed as irrelevant was the hidden millionaire who held his career and perhaps his marriage in the palm of his hand. And in that moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers and the hushed silence of 200 witnesses, Jason Miller finally understood the price of arrogance. The ballroom seemed to shrink after Richard Hale's words thundered through it, and for the first time all evening, Jason Miller's polished mask shattered. He stood before me not as the ambitious executive he had worked so hard to project, but as a man stripped bare, trembling beneath the weight of his own arrogance. His colleagues stared in stunned silence, some averting their eyes, others watching with thinly veiled fascination, as if unwilling to miss a single moment of this family betrayal unfolding in real time. Richard's voice still lingered in the air, his condemnation sharp as glass. "You've spent months treating my business partner like a charity case, and now Jason's future teetered on the edge of collapse." "Please, Jason," whispered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Hale, Mr. Blake. I didn't know. He never told me who he was. I thought—" He trailed off, realizing even as he spoke how hollow the excuses sounded. He had not cared to know. He had not bothered to ask. He had judged, assumed, dismissed, and now every careless choice stood against him like a jury of ghosts. Richard folded his arms, his expression cold with disappointment. "Ignorance is no excuse for disrespect, Jason, especially not in business, especially not in family." The words cut deeper than any official termination letter could have. Jason's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple as he glanced wildly around the circle of witnesses. He looked less like the groom at a triumphant wedding and more like a man awaiting execution. Emily's hand clutched his arm, her knuckles white, but her eyes were not the eyes of a woman in love. They were wide with shock, glistening with tears that refused to fall, her lips trembling as though she could not reconcile the man she had promised to love with the man now unraveling before her. I felt her pain twist in my chest because this was her day, as much as it was my plan. And though Jason deserved every ounce of humiliation he had earned, she did not deserve the heartbreak of seeing her husband exposed as a fraud. Still, the truth had to surface because better a broken heart today than a broken life tomorrow. Jason fell to his knees, his voice rising, desperate now, desperate in a way that stripped him of all dignity. "Please, Mr. Hale, don't fire me. I've worked so hard. I can do better. I can change. Give me one more chance. I was just trying to prove myself. I was afraid of failing, afraid of being nothing." The admission spilled from him like poison long contained, and for a fleeting second I saw not the arrogant salesman who had ridiculed me over soup and sandwiches, but a frightened boy still clawing for validation. His ambition had always been a mask for insecurity, his arrogance a shield against fear. He was terrified of irrelevance, terrified of disappearing into the crowd, and that terror had driven him to diminish others in order to stand taller himself. The very thing he had accused me of being irrelevant was his deepest fear. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, waiting. The silence was worse than any lecture. Jason turned to me, eyes red, his voice breaking. "Mr. Blake, Arthur, please, I know I've treated you horribly. I know I disrespected you, but don't let this end me. Don't let one mistake destroy my life. I'll do anything. Please." Around us, the guests murmured their sympathy, torn between shock and schadenfreude. Some pitied him, others reveled in the irony, but all of them understood one truth. Jason Miller was no longer the golden boy of Technova. He was a cautionary tale, a live demonstration of what arrogance costs. Emily finally found her voice, a whisper that trembled through the still air. "Jason, is this who you really are?" Her words broke him more than mine or Richard's ever could. He reached for her hand, babbling, "No, Emily, no. I'm not like this. I thought your dad was nobody. I thought I had to prove I was worthy. I thought—" But the justifications collapsed under their own weight. His eyes pleaded with her, but her face was stricken as though she had married a stranger. And perhaps she had. She had seen his charm, his ambition, his tender moments, but never this, the raw panic of a man unmasked. I watched it all with a heavy heart. I had wanted this revelation, yes, but I had not wanted my daughter's joy to curdle so quickly. Still, I reminded myself a lie exposed on a wedding day is better than a lifetime of deception. I had played the long game to protect her, and now she was seeing the truth. Jason Miller's arrogance had led him here, but his fear was what kept him on his knees, begging for mercy in front of 200 witnesses. He was no longer the confident groom, no longer the rising star, no longer the man who had mocked me as deadweight. He was simply a man stripped of pride, exposed before the very people he had sought to impress. And as I looked at him trembling, I understood the real consequence. Jason had not just lost his image. He had lost the trust of the one person who mattered most, my daughter. The silence in the ballroom pressed down like a physical weight, the kind of silence that follows a gunshot when everyone waits to see who has fallen. Jason knelt before me, his hands trembling, his voice a broken plea, and I knew the next words from my mouth would decide not just his career, but the course of my daughter's marriage. Richard Hale's eyes were locked on me, his expression caught between fury and respect, the respect of a man who had shared 30 years of triumphs and failures at my side, and trusted my judgment more than any quarterly report. Emily stood pale and shaking, her tears shimmering in the light of the chandeliers, torn between the man she had just married and the father who had raised her. All of them were waiting for me, and in that moment I understood that the power of this entire evening rested on my choice. I stepped closer, my voice steady, controlled, resonant enough to carry across the hushed circle of guests. Jason, look at me. His eyes lifted, wet and desperate, and for the first time I saw not arrogance, not ambition, but something close to humanity. Fear can strip a man down to his core, and his core was trembling like glass. You ask for forgiveness, I said slowly, but forgiveness is not given freely. It has to be earned. And it has to begin with one simple truth. Never again judge a person's worth by their paycheck or their clothing. Never again treat human dignity as something conditional on titles or bank accounts. I paused, letting the words hang, letting them pierce him as surely as his words at Lakeview Grill had pierced me. He nodded vigorously, stammering, Yes, I understand. I promise I'll never. I raised a hand to stop him. Do not promise me. Show me. Character is revealed in choices, and every choice you make from this day forward will show Emily, will show Richard, will show everyone who you truly are. A ripple went through the crowd, a collective exhale. Richard's voice cut through, next formal and stern. Jason Miller, as of this moment, you are on probation, 6 months. Every report, every deal, every meeting will be watched. Any trace of the arrogance Arthur described, any trace, and you're gone. Jason sagged with relief, the words hitting him like a reprieve from a death sentence. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hale. Thank you, Arthur. He grasped for words, his gratitude spilling out like water through broken hands. But gratitude wasn't enough. He had been spared, not saved. Emily stepped forward, then her hand finally resting on his shoulder, her voice trembling but steady. Jason, you've been given another chance. Don't waste it. The look in her eyes was not the look of a starry-eyed bride, but of a woman who had seen the truth and was choosing for now to hope against hope that the man she loved could still grow into someone better. My heart ached for her, but I let her speak because this was her battle as much as mine. A father can reveal the truth, but only a wife can decide if that truth can be lived with. I extended my hand toward Jason, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it. His grip was weak, sweaty, nothing like the confident handshake he had once offered me, with superiority in his eyes. This time his hand held humility, fear, and the faintest spark of resolve. Welcome to the family, son, I said quietly, though my tone carried both warning and mercy. Remember that everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise. He nodded, his voice cracking. I will. I swear it. Whether he meant it, only time would tell. Around us the room began to thaw. The string quartet resumed their gentle melodies, champagne glasses lifted once again. Conversations tiptoed back into existence, though every guest knew they had witnessed a wedding twist they would speak of for years. Richard clapped me on the shoulder, his grin returning for the first time that night. 30 years and you still know how to surprise me, partner. I allowed myself a faint smile. Retirement keeps life interesting. But as I looked at Jason, humbled yet trembling, and Emily, her smile fragile and uncertain, I knew the night had changed everything. Jason had been spared by mercy, not strength. He had been granted probation, not victory. And Emily had glimpsed what her marriage might hold, the fragile balance between ambition and respect, between fear and love. For me, the reconciliation was not about saving Jason. It was about protecting Emily. If he failed, she would know sooner rather than later. If he succeeded, then perhaps the lesson I had forced upon him would echo for the rest of his life. Jason's eyes met mine one last time. Before the night was over, stripped of arrogance, stripped of pride, nothing left but the raw humility of a man who had been undone by his own choices. His voice was soft, almost broken, as he said, "Mr. Blake, Arthur, I am sorry, truly. I was blind, I was arrogant, I was cruel when I should have been kind. Please forgive me." The words were not polished, not rehearsed, not delivered with a salesman's confidence. They were torn from the heart of a man who had finally seen himself clearly. For the first time since I had met him, I believed he understood. Emily stepped forward, then her tears finally falling, and she threw her arms around me, holding tight as if anchoring herself to the truth that had carried her through this storm. "Dad, thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling against my shoulder. "Thank you for protecting me." And in that moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the ballroom, I felt the years of sacrifice, of silence, of patience, all settle into a single truth. I looked at Jason, then at Emily, then at the circle of witnesses who had just seen arrogance collapse and dignity restored, and I spoke the words I knew would outlive the night. Respect isn't measured in dollars. It is revealed in choices. The sentence rolled through the room like a verdict, not just for Jason, but for everyone who had ever judged too quickly, assumed too much, or dismissed too easily. I wanted every man and woman there, and every person hearing this story now, to understand that wealth and titles are temporary, but the way we treat others writes our legacy. And as Jason bowed his head in silence and Emily's embrace tightened around me, I knew the lesson had been delivered. Revenge had never been the goal. Justice and respect that was the true victory. So let me leave you with this. When you look at the people around you, family, strangers, even the quiet ones sitting in the corner, remember that their worth is not hidden in their bank account or their business card. It is written in their choices and how they treat others when no one is watching. If this family betrayal turned revenge story moved you, if it made you think twice about respect and arrogance, then do me one favor, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what choice you would have made. Hit the like button if you believe respect is earned by character, not cash. Save this story so you can return to it when you need reminding. And subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the mask. Because in the end, our choices define us, and tonight you've seen exactly why.